for those that haven't already seen, we're going to be spending up to 3 days, hopefully, together. There's a reserved time of Friday, but I doubt, well, fingers crossed, we won't be requiring that. But looking forward to your company over the next few days as we talk about our long-term plans. So, firstly, apologies. Are any conflicts of interest for anyone wishes to declare? Councillor Barnett?
Just, Mr. Mayor, will we declare them as we go through each report like we normally do?
Yes, that's fine. Unless you want to declare them in advance, that's totally fine. Whichever you prefer.
Whichever we prefer, I'll do it as we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So just firstly, there's a couple of additional agenda items around, particularly the Ringura Civic Precinct. So I just need to, I'd like to move that we consider that additional report that's been circulated, that we consider the additional report as listed.
It was one of the diligent report. It's in diligent. It's one of the appended diligent report. Well, the only additional report.
Yep. So moved by Councillor Barnett, seconded by Councillor Doody. Any discussion? All in favour, aye. Contrary, declare that carried. Okay, so we now come to the overview and financial strategy. So, Jim and Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps if I could just start with some introductory comments, and then Jeff, as you're familiar with, will give you the overview in a little more detail about our position. So, a little bit about the running of the three days. And Sarah's already given you some advice. We'll be working off both the diligent reports, and I see all of you have bought your folders, which is probably the best way of working through the budgets rather than the electronic version, I would imagine. In the past, and I think it would be a good thing for you to consider today, is for each of the budget areas, we've traditionally adopted those pro forma, which saves us having to move and second and debate every particular section of the budget. That doesn't, though, preclude you from moving an amendment to any of the budgets, and if you wanted to move an amendment, our custom and practice has been to treat that amendment as though it were a motion, yep, which enables that person to have the right of reply should they want to change anything in the budget. When we get to the diligent reports, though, they would be treated as we treat any normal agenda report, which is moved, seconded and debated as we would do on any other day. So hopefully that is understood and clear. The timings, we're here for as long as we need to be here. There is a request for Simon Markham's budgets to be considered later in the day, as he's needs to be in Wellington for the next couple of days. So from about 3:30, wherever we get to at about 3:30, his team's budgets will be considered at that point. I have an apology from about 4 o'clock today. I've got Greater Christchurch Partnership Chief Executive meeting, and it's got a number of important matters on it, and Jeff is going to ride shotgun for the Mayor if needed, so that will happen later in the day. In terms of the draft budget that you have in front of you, we have put that together based on the numerous meetings and workshops we've had discussing our approach, and we think we've landed with something which was our understanding of the signals we got from Council over the last 4 or 5 months in particular. So hopefully most of it aligns with your understanding. Of course, there's opportunities for debate, and that's what today's all about. We have got together the draft words of the consultation document, and we thought that would be useful to circulate to you soon in the next so that you can see the flavour of that, and you can see where the issues that we're talking about, how we've captured those, and if you've got any feedback for us about that, then we'd be happy to receive that. So I understand that's being going to be in hard copy to. Oh, put it. Oh, okay. They're going to make it look. Oh, okay. They're going to make it look a little flasher for us. So we'll let you know when that's there. But probably by the time we've got to day 3, it would be good in the wrap-up conversation to say, based on everything, does this look and feel about what right and what you were expecting from the conversation? I think that's all of the key comments. Happy to answer any questions on anything I've said. Otherwise, I'll pass to Jeff to start the overview.
Any initial questions of Jim? Jim, I just want to give some feedback. I think of all the years I think the budget packs and the information here is excellent. So thanks to the staff for the work that they've done. It's been a huge piece of work preparing all this, but just in advance to say, and I know there's been a range of questions from colleagues, which has been really good, like how it's been looked after this year, Sarah, so we all get an idea and a flavour of what the questions are. It's not to stop questions here today, because that's entirely what the process is about, but it has given us a better ability to see what the answers are, and thanks to Jeff and the team and all that have been involved in providing the answers to that. Okay. Any questions, team?
One last thing I forgot was scheduled breaks. There's half an hour at lunch, and I think 12:45 is the intended lunch break, and that
It's green room.
is available in the green room, which is down the end of the corridor and far right. It looks green, funnily enough. And we're here. The intention is to be here till about 6 each day. So hopefully that means that maybe Thursday doesn't go quite as long, and if it does, well, we'll have needed all of that time.
So morning tea and afternoon tea breaks about 10:15 and 3:15. I'm going to try to stick to those times because it's important we have those stops. So just to give that's so 12:45 for lunch today. All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Jim.
Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. This will be our 6th LTP since 2006 that we do every 3 years, and I think from my perspective it's been one which have had more staff briefings and brilliant direction from the Council in making the documentation that we provided to you today the quality that it is. I think it is. I agree with your comments, Mr. Mayor. It's very good. I think the key, it's a bit of twisting and turning here. So just a reminder of the key documents that go into the LTP and consultation process. That was quite clever. The key section of the main document itself has the Mayor's message and overview, so it has a good overview of what's actually happening, not over 1 year but 10 years. Unlike other annual plans, this document will have a financial strategy and an infrastructure strategy that gets put into the front of the document. Some councils use standalone ones. We put ours in the one document, and it makes the document, we feel it makes the document flow better. And unlike the mandatory requirement of 30 years, we do our infrastructural strategy over 150 years, and basically try and take the fuller life of the assets. And the reason for that is it meets our depreciation policy, which I'll just explain a little bit later on. Then there's the activity statements, and there's mandatory ones and unmandatory ones. So they are included within there of each of their little commentaries, and budgets that extend over the 10-year period, not just the 1 year period in comparison to the previous year. So we have a rates impact statement, and then the consultation document itself. The consultation document has to be a standalone document. And it's not a summary of the main document. It actually, the reason it's standalone is it has a number of options in there which we are consulting the community on, and we'll just explain those a bit later. That consultation document goes under a hot review, and what they do is they measure our consultation document and the information it has in it and see whether it's standard and has the information as other councils should across the country. Website, we'll put all the information on the website, so all of our background material that will go on the website, and the underlying policies, AMPs, and strategies and assumptions. At the moment, you've been provided with the draft consultation plan, and I understand the list is just finalising the more detailed one that will ask councillors to commit to the presentation of their different venues around the district over the next six weeks when it's consulted. So this is just coming one at a time, so there's the whole lot there. The assumptions and policies, so over the last 3 or 4 months or more, we've been going through the key assumptions. We've looked at a number of the economic factors, revenue financing policy, which is a paper later on to make a small change to that, rating policies, doing some amendments which will make that work better for our community, treasury policy, depreciation funding, we've looked at that again, and we've updated the development contributions and the underlying AMPs and level of service that we're providing. Just one note, the LTP is being it's like in other years, it's been produced in a form which sees the council as a going concern, controlling the assets of Three Waters, just to put that, confirm that the basis of that we've done it is that we're still managing that asset and we're still providing water and sewer supply. So the growth assumptions that we've used in the LTP are much the same as what we used in the current 3 years, and that's that we're projecting on a medium to high growth based on New Zealand stats figures, and so that sees us with a population of about 78,400 in 2031. And just looking at that line there, that's that red line that just goes through there. So that's and the rationale for that is we're continuing to grow above the rate, which is set on the medium figures.
Sorry, Councillor Barnett.
What's the latest date of census figures that we've received on that, Jeff? And do you know when the latest one is due out?
Yeah, I think that is the problem. I don't think we have this in the latest. I think this is based on the previous one, which is extrapolated out.
Yeah, so we still don't have 2018 census data completely, but with the latest population estimate we have for the district, which was June last year, is 64,700 or 800. I think 700 is the current estimated population 30 June 2020.
So we're extrapolating from the 2013 figures. Is that correct?
I think stats numbers are a composite, somewhere of a composite 2013 plus what they've seen, what they estimate since that time. So it's polite would be a hybrid type position. It's the best data that we can find at the moment, and if it's materially different when we get an update, we'll look at what the implications are. But yeah, it's not ideal, but it's what we've got.
So what that means is we're growing at about 4,800 new dwellings over that period of time. The year that we're in currently, we're projecting based on 550 new dwellings in the 2021-22 year. and of course we have to model it out so it equals that 4,800 over the period of time, so it drops away. Last time we consulted mainly on 5 main topics. This time just the 3. But those 5 main topics are still having impacts on rates in the current LTP, such as the multi-sports facility, which is completed later this year. So the three topics that we're forecasting on are mainly strategic focused, and there's a number of papers which cover those later on in the budgets. The first one is the community facilities at Pegasus and Woodend in the Ravenswood area to secure the land there for future development of community facilities. The second one is to expand and upgrade the Trevor Inch Memorial Library and couple that with the Rangiora Civic Centre. Just makes sense to bring those 2 projects together, leaving the Civic Centre where it was in year 11, which is now year 8 in the next LTP, and coupling the library with that. And the third one was provision of car park building facilities in the Rangiora Town Centre in year 8 of the LTP. We're covering, although they're the specific options that we're seeking feedback on, we're covering in the CD document other topics as well, which the public are likely to give feedback on, and that's updating a COVID response and recovery plan, responding to climate change and sustainability, and also making sure that the public are aware of the government's initiative for 3 water infrastructure reviews. There's some other areas which we're providing more substantial updates on, and that's the district plan when that's being consulted, the Western Rangiora road improvements, and the wastewater pipeline capacity upgrades for the Eastern District's sewer, and stormwater and waterway upgrades. So you'll see that we're very much a going concern with the 3 waters. There's quite a significant program being worked out.
On the climate change, would we not be showing that in a separate, given that it's an unknown for everybody, including us, would we not be showing that as a separate topic, so there would be 4 major consultations? I mean, that is something in the next 10 years which is going to be the forefront of this council, if you like, or any council. Would we not be better to extrapolate that out? I mean, obviously emphasise the unknown factor of it, but just my view, I think it needs to be a number 4 or number 3, maybe number 1 in the thing if you're going to prioritise them, but separate.
So I think it's intended for what is the 4th bullet point down, COVID response, responding to climate change and sustainability, and government infrastructure review, each of those to have a separate section which shows them clearly. That the challenge we've had with that group of issues, they're all significant issues, but in terms of our engagement, we don't really have any material options to engage on. It's a bit naff to say we do it or we don't do it. Well, of course we're going to, and we don't have enough yet around, say, climate change to say here's the major proposal in it which materially affects, but we certainly want to give airtime to those issues, explain that they are being reflected in our document, and this is our approach, and in some cases they're a watching brief, and in the case of 3 Waters review, if that materialises, it could see a fundamental rethink and probably an amendment or a new LTP, depending on the consultation and engagement required around those. So in our heart of hearts, we didn't want to include Clayton options for consultation on topics that there isn't really we're welcome to receive feedback like we have, whereas the first 3 issues we've put in some alternate options which are plausible particularly around the timing of those first three issues. There is the don't do it at all option, of course, but the others usually involve changing the timing of those projects as they're currently sitting in our plan.
I suppose what I'm asking is exactly your explanation is actually in that document, is what I'm saying. The unknowns and the reasons why, as opposed to what we're doing, because we're not there yet.
Yeah, and hopefully when you've had a chance to have a look at the document, be interested in your feedback as to whether that flavour is about right or not.
Just to remind, so I just add to that. So everything that's in the annual LTPs up for debate and comment from the community. These are just the strategic ones that cover that. And just a reminder to actually put an option out there. It needs to have basically three things. One, you have to identify what the issue is. You have to identify what the options are that you're considering and cost. And the last one is that you have to actually indicate what the impact on the rate payer is. And so with those, it's very difficult to determine that with a climate change policy. Yeah, that's the
clarity. That's exactly what I'm saying. We need explained in there why we don't have those three things as the unsureties around. If our community understands that, hopefully they will still come and submit to us on how they see the world. But that's exactly the explanation that I'm talking about.
Thanks, Steve. Councillor Bartlett?
Yes, Jeff, totally understand that these are issues that basically they affect everybody pretty much. They're quite high-reaching and strategic, as you say. However, we do have a fees and charge, quite a substantial fees and charge change at the airfield, which the report says has not been consulted yet with the wider community. That's been wrapped into the budget. How is that going to be consulted on with the users of the airfield? Is that going to have a section of any sort to highlight that to users of the airfield?
I think
So perhaps that would be a good one to talk about when we get to consider that matter, and whether there is a more targeted engagement. And sometimes in the past we have had targeted engagements that run parallel, and if the council feels that's warranted with a select group, then that can be something we can do then.
Definitely. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
so. Coming to the next one, which is probably the key one you want to look at, is what are the rate impacts over the next 10 years? We've done a little bit of smoothing. Not a lot of smoothing goes into year one, and the reason for that is a lot of the large capital program is in the front year or two, which has an impact. It spreads out on rates in the following years in terms of the additional cost and depreciation that it comes with. So 2 3.9s in the first 2 years, followed by 4 4.2s, and then it drops down to what the next slide I'll just explain how it's all working in terms of inflation. But just to explain how we sort of in a general sense how we get to those numbers is that if you take the local government cost index, which is based on the Burl inflation adjusters, so they range between negative 0.6% in the current year we're in, 3.6 in the first year. But if you look at those numbers across the 10 years, they average out around about 2.6%. So we are projecting local government cost inflation, particularly from around about year 3, 4, right through of 2.5 and 2.6%. If you look at putting the progressive earthquake funding, which stops increasing in year 9 of the LTP, add that to that number, you get around about 3.5 to 4.5%, and that's what we're averaging. If you look at our last 20 years of rate increases, they average at 4.3%. Some comments in terms of what other councils are doing. I'm not seeing anything that's lower than these numbers. I think the year of the 1.5% in COVID is certainly impacting a little bit on how we're projecting some of the figures. So these numbers contain all of the reports that are for decision in front of the council, but they do exclude the opt-in for curbside collection, curbside waste collection. They include the recycling collection numbers. If you look at the way inflation works, is you have the CP. There we go. The green line that comes through here is the, these are based on Burl again, CPI is coming through on the green line for the 10 years. You see the local government cost index, so we're using that average of the two in year one. It pops up here to 2.9 and comes out here. So there's a fair bit of fluctuation around in this period here. The blue line at the top here is our rate projections, and if you were to take off the earthquake funding, you see that coming quite close to the local government cost index at the end of that year 8 to 10 line. So we're trying to keep our increases in those outer years quite close to that inflation. Not a lot we can do in this period here. We have quite a lot of Capex program that's impacting through there, and I've already pre-circulated the capital program that's out there. 85 million in the current year, 70 million in year one, and although some of that's been funded from external shovel-ready and stimulus funding, it's still impacting on the rate. If you look at the individual area increases, this is based on the average property this year, what that property would pay in the first year of the LTP. The figures are looking not too bad. That sheet there is showing properties with average movements. Some of those ones there, such as Burnside, they have that the joining of the scheme. So and that includes the loan repayment over that 25-year period. Second sheet, you see some of the urban areas such as Rangiora and Kaipoi. A lot of the urban areas around that 3.7 to 4%. Points Road down the bottom here, once again that's part of that pre-consulted rate which that community's been advised on. Operating expenditure, so the green line there is rates, and the orange line is other. That little blip there is some of the funding that we're getting for grant funding. It's more affected by the roading program, so that's roading subsidies coming through here. But you can see rates over that period of time, they're going to increase 73%, $49 million. And our expenditure is 38%, or $40 million. The difference between the two of them is the progressive funding and the loan repayment provisions that we are making. So if you think about the earthquake loan funding, that goes from about $3 million in year one up to about $10 million in year 10. And I just thought for interest I'd show the proportions that we're budgeting for interest. So clearly does rise, be consistent. Our maintenance and operational work as opposed to depreciation, and our personnel costs. What is that? Round the wrong way, sorry. That's our personnel costs, and that's our interest. So what they normally report in the papers is that we've got this huge rate increase, but you've got to remember that's inflation proofed. and some of the true increases that come through don't they're not really, they reflect that, but it's inflation. So if you think about property prices and what they go up in 10 years, you can sort of make that comparison. But pretty consistent expenditure, no real big blips coming through. And that graph there, table pie chart there, is just showing where the operational expenditure is occurring. So you can see that roading and recreation are the two biggest individual activities. Recreation making up of green space and buildings and facilities, of course. The three waters around here making up about 20 to 25% of our business. That's our building control and environmental services and that area. Just to explain the Capex. So when you look at the Capex program, it looks like we've got quite a large program that we've pushed out to the end. It's not quite like that. The blue is the inflated Capex, and the orange is the uninflated Capex. So you can see out here, it's pretty standard, but just explaining that, there are 4 key projects which come into that, and that's what I've tried to negate out here. So, except for these 4 major projects, the Library, Civic Centre, Screwbridge, and some roading in relation to the parking, Tram Road, and the western side of the bypass that takes you around that route, our capital program is pretty consistent when you take the inflation out of that. So we come down from, take for instance in the year 22, 23, 39 out here, 36. Capital expenditure by category. Once again, it's fairly consistent. You've got some additional demand that's coming in here in terms of some of the sewer and projects. Out here, the library and civic centre. The green here is our new levels of service, shovel ready and stimulus funding that's coming through additional. When we talk about the 3 categories, it's not a pure sense like that. You have to, like there's some works there that'll have a bit of both. It'll have renewal, capital, and growth and renewals. You put it, the rule is that you put it into the one that has the most amount of that nature of capital, unless you can easily separate it. So what is that doing to debt? Our debt's pretty well consistent with what we were saying in the last LTP. We're increasing in this period here. So you can see the red is our new debt, green is our repayment of debt, and the blue line here is our total accumulated debt. So you can see it's slowly rising in terms of the new loans, and here we're starting to pay off more debt than loans, and we start dropping down. And in this part here, this is the library, civic centre, some of that capital work coming through there, which pushes it up. If you go a little bit further out from there into year 20, it drops down again. So it starts coming down. I think the key thing that I always look at in terms of debt, in terms of our credit rating, is trying to keep that debt under 180% of the ratio, so debt to total revenue streams. Standard & Poor's, they work out that figure a little bit different to the way we work it out, but the key thing for us is to make sure we keep that debt under 180. You can see down the bottom here, quite high at the moment, and as right, they signalled to us that they were getting concerned. But then they took that off the negative rating office and made it stable. And you can see from here the 176, 180, 176, and it slowly, rapidly through here decreases to 142. We're in a good position. So in terms of our credit rating, we should be able to maintain a AA stable on those numbers. If you look at that graphically as well, and this one here is actually showing our policy where we keep headroom for if we've got insurance and haven't got insurance. So these are the orange and blue here. So that little cap on the top there is our headroom which we keep ourselves with. I should note that we've just got to update this this table here. That line that's straight there now pops up to close to the 300 and then drops away slowly under the local government funding agency. What we're doing is we're trying to make sure we stay within that policy, our own internal policy as well. If you look at interest to total rates, looks pretty good. Well under that policy limit, and it's been maintained pretty consistent as you would expect with that total debt profile we showed before. It's worth explaining the depreciation policy and our future renewals. So our current policy for depreciation is that we don't fully depreciate the actual cost of depreciation, but we do take that into account when we actually extrapolate the depreciation itself and the investment curve. So what we do is we set our depreciation at levels which will be able to renew the asset when it comes up for renewal, also taking into account the investment that we get off those funds. So not only will we be a borrower, but we're an investor in later years. So just explaining the graph here, these are all the different activities that we have in their renewal profiles. So that bottom one there is our roading, which you expect is quite consistent. The little bit here would be maybe some of our major bridge renewal or coal renewal. Three waters comes through here, and green space, and some of this here is more of our buildings. So you can see the red line here is our accumulated depreciation, and we're building up a fund, and this is net of any renewals that take place. So in this year we'd pay out that much. This would be our amount of renewals, accumulated funds that would be left for future renewal. So that grows up here to such levels where it's able to maintain this high growth of renewal program through here. And you can see that's sustained through here, high capital cost of renewals. That fund drops away right down to here, and it's maintained down here, and you would expect this comes down and that grows back up again. That's over 150 years. For the first time in the annual report this year, we actually reported on that, and some people did pick up on it, that we and questioned how that was working. They quite liked the model. But what that's telling, what that shows and communicates to the public is that we're prudently managing that renewals program over the whole life of the asset. We're not just looking at 30 years. If you're just to look at 30 years, we would come in here and we'd think, oh, we're okay. We don't have to build that fund up. Once you got to here, you'd have to have substantial loan programs, which would be, it's not intergenerational equity. It would be quite remiss on us not to actually build this fund up because of this high sustained growth that we've gone through over the last 25 years. So it's quite an important piece of our strategy, and the whole council, our engineers, planners, and recreation green space team are all brought into this, and they all use this as part of their asset management planning. So cost drivers. So we've got the earthquake increase. We know that's adding 511,000 in year one, and that's going to continuously add between 0.7 and 1% of our total rates until we hit that threshold where it's able to be repay off all the debt related to earthquakes. Capex program. So you can see the 85 million there, and the 71 million in year one. Our normal capital works programs, it lies somewhere between that slide we showed before, about 30 million and 40 million per annum. The multi-use stadium, so that opens sometime after around July, August, and that rate starts, the cost for the loan funding and that starting to kick in there as well. And the shovel ready and stimulus, 27 million. Although most of that's funded, we still we're taking out some 50% of the shovel ready to meet that funding, bringing forward some of the program that was there, and the cost of the maintaining that network and depreciation kicks in a little bit earlier. So that's why the smoothing of the rate is quite important to obviously get these large spikes. If you look at the dollar increase where they've been, you can see that you're pretty well right across the board, really, quite evenly spread. It's 3.9%. There's no real large increases from some of the areas there. And you can see that by this table here where we look at the movements by activity. I suppose the largest one there is our earthquake, 510, 22% increase in that rate. So sometimes it's not just the dollar increase here that you have to look at, it's actually the percentage increase that you're looking at. That's the key thing, and they're unadjusted for growth. Roading here at 4%, that's got a large Capex program, so that's why you're not seeing that coming through. Generate movements, and that's just highlighting the fact that that's mainly made up of general earthquake. And that's all the general rate activity, and you can see there's quite significant increases going down to negative increases. The top one there is the COVID funding. We reduced that loan funding from 2 million to 1 million, or proposing to. And just a wagon wheel showing that, just showing the same, but as a proportion. I thought I'd just cover the other adjustments that we've made in line with policy. So we've done some minor adjustments for revenue and financing policy. The two that we need to make adjustments for, and there's no significant impacts on properties, but is the uniform annual general charge that's gone from 120 to 135. It's not a $15 increase on urban properties because the general rate is a combination of capital value and fixed price. So the actual effect of that $15 is a $4 increase to the average property. And the same effect for the recreation level of service to the neighbourhood communities. That's gone to $85. We haven't adjusted that for a number of years. And the effect of... Oh, sorry.
It's just before you... Is anyone else feeling a little chilly? Yeah. We could... I know it's going to be a warm day, but perhaps we just adjust it a little. I'm feeling a bit of a chill down my back. Not just in your figures, Jeff.
Yes. A lot of numbers here, but and the effect of that is $7 movement on a sort of a property. It's worth about 3,100. So not a lot of movement, just minor adjustments. But they do have bigger impacts to the larger, farm properties and so forth.
Just to remind people, in our recreation rate, we have two rates: one for our urban areas and one for our residential. And residential areas pay, and we're proposing pay an extra $85 over rural, and that pays for all of the neighbourhood reserves and higher amenity that sits within our urban areas.
And the important one, which we're not allowed to breach, is that you're not allowed to have any more than 30% of these types of uniform charges across the district. That cap, we are sitting at 25% at the moment, so we're well within that cap. The largest it gets to is in year 8 of the LTP, and that gets to 27.49, so well within those. Oh. There we go. So, happy to take any questions. That's
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for that overview. Any questions from colleagues? I think you've done a good job of explaining. Oh, sorry, Philip.
Jeff, they'll get a copy. Members will get a copy of this in Diligent as well. Is that where you intend to provide it?
Yeah, a copy of this and a copy of the CD document in Diligent. So have a look at that.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Phil, you had a question?
Just one question, Jeff. The rate projections, are they based on extending some of the loan repayment terms, or is that separate from what you've given us?
No, all the papers that are in front of the council are included in these numbers. So whatever decisions you make, that are against those recommendations, I'll have to back out of this and then present that to you.
So the paper that Jeff's bringing, that you're going to consider shortly about taking a longer term on our loan repayments, if you resorted to the status quo, we would add, it would take 7 million off our debt, but it would raise some of our rate requirement in each year if you were to retain the status quo. So that's a conversation to be had. Jeff's numbers anticipate you supporting what he's proposing. Now, if you don't, he'll have to unwind that.
That's right.
Al?
Crystal ball gazing, Jeff. Ashburton have just done a project where they looked at the reduction in cost of reduction to farming incomes of all the water things in the wider sense of all those, and all the plan changes are enacted with the time frames that they're talking about, and they came up with an 80% reduction to farming incomes across the district. Possibly in our area be less than that, because we're probably not as dependent on farming as Ashburton. Have you factored in that sort of doomsday scenario, or in your business? As you explained, you've got to work on a business as usual. But are some of those factors? Have you got a comment on that sort of thing coming to bite us in the next 12, 24 months?
I'm not sure of Ashburton's circumstances. I'm not sure if they'll have a rate increase as low as ours either, because they've got that large $55 million building. But these are not factoring in those incomes, no. But what it does do with the bill numbers is that it brings in what the effects are to us. We have about 15% of our ratepayers that are eligible for the ratepayer rebate. So quite conscious that trying to keep those figures quite close to that local government cost index. I should say that the local government cost index is included in the CPI, so even though we're above that for our sector, those numbers are included in the whole wash of things, so that rates are considered as part of the CPI movement.
Just further to that, I think in Ashburton, in the report you refer to, is the effect of National Policy Statement on Freshwater and the higher standards that align with that, and it anticipates that will affect farm gate revenue, which directly is going to flow through to farm valuation. For them, as for us, those effects are going to roll through in revaluations over time, and if they may well revert to their next highest alternate use to their current use. Now, whether that's subdivision or whether that's some alternate farming use which generates a lower value, that will then reflect through in our total valuation, and will progressively hit the QV estimate of the value of our district. And what that will do is impact the incidence of rating, so that if those property values were to plummet as a result of that, and obviously that causes significant hardship along the way with that, then the council, I think at that time, if there were major changes in the incidence of rating and the fairness of that, then the council would want to reflect on its revenue and finance policy and its rating settings at that time to respond to that. It might also ultimately impact council's view on levels of service, although that's too early to foreshadow at this time. So you are right to highlight that there is uncertainty facing all communities in New Zealand. Particularly, we're going to face some uncertainty in our urban communities to address some of those issues as well. So they will put pressures on all parts of our community and how we respond as a council. It is one of the things we're going to have to carefully consider. Probably it will may kick in by the time of the next revaluation, maybe, depending on the progress. We're in a weird property market space at the moment, and but there is some softening in farm values given that uncertainty that's sitting out there. So yeah, you're right to note it, but at this time it's too early for us to other than note that that is an issue. It's too early for us to be able to effectively assess the impact of that across our district. Probably something we're going to have to model quite a bit at the next revaluation if there's a significant dip, or at our next LTP if some of those implications start to become clearer. Then that'll start a conversation on revenue and financing policy.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that point. You're going to see some silly numbers come out in this LTP, I think, across the sector, and it depends on each council's circumstances as well.
It is important to note that these numbers do not include any proposed movement of ECAN rates on our ratepayers. So these are waimakariri district only increases, and we understand that the increases proposed by ECAN could be significantly more than what we're signalling. So that, because they sit on our rate invoice, we may get a little bit of collateral with that, and we will need to explain clearly the difference if that is the case.
Very clearly.
For example, I've only seen one number under 4%, under 5%. Only one so far under 5, and I've seen quite a few. Apart from us. But it's once again, it depends on the circumstances, what they've got in play, and the revenue and financing policy is another thing that you just identified. We do it purely on land value, capital value. Some councils are still on land value. Has different impacts on where the rate hits. We've got a number of differentials which we identify different levels of service. So they'll have their own pressures, and it might spark a fair bit of debate through the sector. I think we're going to go into a little bit of a period. It's a huge uncertainty. This LTP is probably the most uncertain one. We have the environment around us is impacting. We've got climate change, sustainability. We've got COVID. We don't know whether there'll be another lockdown. For instance, if we have another lockdown, what does that do to our rates? And, you know, you're hearing economists say, some are saying that there's going to be interest rate movements in 18 months' time upwards. You still get economists saying there's going to be higher unemployment in the second quarter of this year. So there's lots of things to consider. We just have to put a responsible budget out there.
Wendy? Hold on, we're just borrow Kirsten. Kirsten, could you lead? Oh, there's battery coming, Wendy.
Thank you. Just we're a bit concerned about this earthquake debt we've got, and because that really could be a big milestone around our neck, and just think that we need to get that under control because we have no idea. You're saying it's going out now to year 9, which has been stretched out. Just really concerned about what we're actually going to be inflicting on our ratepayers.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's a strategy that we put in place a number of years ago, and we've added to it regeneration, and that's why it's been pushed out a little bit. It's still within that 25-year repayment period, so we're still keeping to our promise to have that all paid off within the 25 years. It does end up like a small rate. From memory, it peaks around about $395 thereabouts in year 10 with inflation. But yeah, it's I suppose it's one of those little legacies that you have from an earthquake. If another one strikes us, we just need to make sure that we've got that headroom there to make sure we can battle through that one as well.
The alternative, there's really only one alternative strategy, which is to accelerate the repayment and accelerate the rate. So ask for more rates sooner is the only other option. And given everything that's in play, we've still think supporting the current approach is the right approach. The alternate would be to seek more from our ratepayers earlier and get that rate level higher earlier than what is currently forecast, and I'm not sensing a great desire to want to do that.
You'll see some councils do that. They'll hit a big rate, sort of 10-11%, and but it sits at 10-11% for a long time. Whereas ours, what we're trying to do is cushion those rates out, smooth them down, keep them low as possible. Because we're dealing with long-term assets, people in the next 50 years to 70 years will still be enjoying those assets without paying for them. So I'm quite comfortable, trying to stretch that out, knowing that those assets will be there for a number of years.
Any further questions? All right, thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Jim. Sarah, if we had an early morning tea, it makes sense to start Jared's section. Is that going to be okay? We started about...
There's a report first.
Should we deal with that first? Oh, there's a performer recommendation first, actually. So, okay, let's deal with those. Good plan. So, firstly, just to have everyone's attention, thank you. Normally, as a matter of course, we'll have a performer recommendation that just adopts and confirms all the budget recommendations. That doesn't mean that we don't come back and look at that differently later. That would just be treated as a simple amendment as we go through. So, Councillor Mealings is moving, seconded by Councillor Ward, that the Council adopt and confirm all budget resolutions as pro forma. Is that what you're happy to move? Any discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour, aye. Contrary, declare that carried. So we come to now 4.1, which is in your agenda, main agenda reports.
Just on process, one thing I didn't mention, which is what we've traditionally done, there are reports in Diligent that relate to each area. What we propose to do is we deal with those when we get to it. So for when we get to roading, if there's a roading related report, we do that first, and then we go to the detailed budgets after that. There are 2 reports that we want to deal with at the earliest opportunity. They make sense in coming up in the discussion, and under roading we would like to deal with the whole town centres car parking report, which is 4.6 I think it is. We want to deal with that at the first instance, so that the roading, that's the first time it intersects with our conversation, and then we get that all locked in. So that's one that we want to do early, and the other one that we're going to do early is the Civic Centre library, and we propose to do that as part of the library conversation rather than the property conversation, which happens right at the last on the last day, or the last hour of the last day. So we'll do the civic library one as part of the library debate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So,
Don't have a tie on, David.
oh, sorry. Very glum. Yes. Don't interpret that as we're happy he's going, David. Thank you. So, Jeff, if we could now deal with 4.1, so that's in the budget packs, is in the Diligent there. So, it's proposed change to Treasury policy. Jeff?
Thank you. Yes, this does make a change to the Treasury policy by increasing the term of the loan from 25 to 50 years, suggesting we do this with Three Waters infrastructure, and also suggest that we look at that for other areas as well. The rationale for this is that it provides a good relationship to intergenerational equity. A lot of the assets that we have that we're purchasing, the weighted average life of those assets is beyond that period. So therefore, they come about because we're looking at basically how do we reduce rates, and how do we improve the way we do things. I had a good look around some councils, and some do extend their funding out as far as this. When you look at a number of the assets that they were using, where you could see this as being an aggressive way of funding those assets, because they're getting paid off within 25 years, and some of these assets are lasting 80 years plus. The other thing that you can sort of relate it to is if you look at your home ownership. You know, you might have a home there where you buy into a new home, you put the first person that buys it puts it out for 25 years, they pay the loan off, or they sell the house and then another loan owner comes in and it goes out another 25 years. You could have that same property that has a long-term asset that's getting funded by loan over a long period of time. It does help the ratepayer out, the current ratepayer. It means that they don't pay as much in rates. You're not just looking at ratepayers and residential properties, you're looking at commercial and business owners. Doesn't make a lot of difference to some, but a farmer, for instance, it means that he has more disposable income in his hand to actually put into investment into his property. And so the next farmer that comes along and farms that land, yes, he does pay for some of those assets that he's enjoying, and the first farmer doesn't. So that's just using a farming situation, but you can put a residential section or anything into that mix, and it's the same philosophy. The difference is remodelled is about 6.4 million that we would be collecting in rates over that 10 years, but and we'd be needing to offset that with around about similar funding and loan funding. So it does put the debt up. There's a graph in the paper there, table there, that shows that it has minimal impact on our interest policy, the benchmark and indices we use for that, and you can see in the middle of our term there on the table 4.12 that we don't get into a situation where debt just keeps on climbing and climbing. It's actually in proportion to our number of ratepayers and what our capital works program is at the time. So happy to take any questions.
I've just got one additional comment, which I think I can make now, is that this sees a slight reduction in our loan repayments on capital program. About 90 million of our debt relates to Three Waters. Now, if the proposed reforms occur in the way they're currently signalled, then we would anticipate that debt will go with the assets, and that would be our expectation. It's far from clear. So the motivation to repay that debt any faster than necessary at the moment is low on our books. So I'm just Jeff's while we are wanting to ensure we're not doing anything that's inappropriate in terms of ensuring the long-term sustainability, this would see that debt just sit fractionally higher in say 3 years' time than it otherwise would. So that will become the responsibility of a new infrastructure provider if that was the way that this reform headed. And look, at that point there'd probably be a rethink about the overall strategy of the remainder of the council business. So it's not a strong driver, but it's just something that sat in the back of my mind as seeing this as not inappropriate, not irresponsible, but not inappropriate to do in the current environment.
In addition to that too, you've got to remember we're also building up a replacement fund through depreciation at the same time. So, a 25-year loan on a long-term asset is quite aggressive.
Yeah. So firstly, Councillor Williams, followed by Councillor Atkins.
At the moment, we've got a level of quite low interest rates. The next 25 years it's probably forecast to be low. What happens in this scenario if all of a sudden in 15 years' time the interest rates goes up to 20% like it's been before? How's that going to affect our next generation of people?
Yeah, it's a good question. What we have in place to try and mitigate it is we have a treasury policy and we keep our maturities in place with that. On top of that, we have interest rate hedging, which takes out the spikes in those types of events. And yes, we expect interest rates to start rising again. As we progress out, we would actually adjust for that. But the key thing is that we keep well within our treasury policy limits, and that is the key to the mitigating any risk there.
So you're telling me we can keep our finance rate for the next 50 years at a low level?
Now, interest rate hedging in the next 10 years is keeping that down. We're on a profile which is going down. We've still got quite high. There's some of our hedging that we've got on our books is still quite high. We can't close it out because it would cost us quite a fortune. So we just leave it there and it just closes itself out over time. But yes, we're on a slope which is seeing a decreasing rate at the moment. And yes, it will start rising again in the future, but the key is that you manage that risk with hedging. And yes, if it gets up to 22% again, I don't think anyone's going to be able to manage that type of interest.
Yeah. And that's we can't hedge up to 25 years, can we?
No. It would cause, if you got interest rates of 22%, like you've seen in the late 80s, we'd have to put rates up. You can't sustain it.
Councillor Atkinson.
Thank you. Probably, Jim, just around the local government sector and the explanation you just gave on Three Waters, and I realise the uncertainty around that, but that's been discussed in forums I've been at, certainly with other councils, and that debt level. Have we had, if questioned on that, and that's one of the reasons that we're going to this policy or looking at going to this policy, if questioned on that, do you think that this council's had sufficient discussions that are documented previous, i.e. headroom, and the fact that we've talked about taking our loans out over longer periods for those? Do you think we would have enough information that we've discussed that before the question has been raised around Three Waters to defend our position?
I think this decision can be made independent of the Three Waters review. I just put that in as a little additional flavour of uncertainty over the next 2 or 3 years. You know, if I felt that this wasn't the right long-term thing to do for the council, or wasn't a sustainable view, then I'd certainly tell you that the reason we had 25 years initially, and this goes back nearly 20 years, Jeff and I have been working on our financial strategy together, is through the early times of our 6 LTPs that we've put together, we, you know, to be fair, we didn't have a high degree of confidence in our asset management planning and our renewal program and our expectations for growth, and we continued to adopt a reasonably conservative approach in regards to debt repayment, which was get it off the books as quickly as we can because we're not quite sure what's coming. I'm certainly, over the last half a dozen years in particular, post-earthquakes, and with the work that our team have done on our infrastructure modelling, and you can see that in Jeff's Capex program, that's, you know, you take away the known peaks, the underlying program's looking reasonably stable based on good engineering advice. So got a lot more confidence about the renewal profile and shape of our future expenditure, and therefore some higher level of confidence that we can be less aggressive and it not unduly impact our overall financial position or compromise the council. If I thought that was the case, I certainly wouldn't be supporting this approach, but I think this can be reasonably sustained by the council.
Councillor Manings, followed by Councillor Stewart and Councillor Barnett.
Thank you. When I was reading this, I did think that with the Three Waters that was possibly what you were going for. In the event that we maintain these long life assets, and the interest rates do go up, are we able to, if we deem it to be a better idea, are we able to actually revert to a faster payoff rate?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
That allows us to hedge our bets. I had another question and it's gone.
I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Come back to you in a minute. Councillor Stewart?
Thank you. I got quite excited about this when I read the first page, and then I turned, because I immediately thought of earthquake loans and the multi-use stadium, and then I flipped the page and got a bit depressed. But can you explain why this can't apply to those two elements? I know you've got it because of the way the loans are structured. Can you just...
You can. You take roading, for instance. A lot of the roading, life of the roading, the reseals and that, some of it's around that, less than 25 years actually. What you could do with the roading is you could take the culverts and the bridges out of that, and you could treat that asset as a separate category and do that over a longer period. So you get that same sort of weighted average approach, and that's what we just need to model. Just it's a little bit more complicated. I haven't worked with Joanne to go through that yet. The same applies with some of our green space playground equipment and stuff like that. You could do the same thing for that. Our multi-court stadium, we've already made that decision to put the depreciation reserve into that in the first 25 years until the loan's repaid off, and then accumulate the funds after that.
Can you use your microphone, please?
And alter that. And I mean, that same argument is
Yeah.
the earthquake loan. So, I mean, they come up for renewal within that 25-year period. So why can't you take it from there?
Yes, the intention is to come back to the council with the other assets that we own and see whether that can be applied to them as well. Yep.
Thank you. You've rethought your question, so
So if we change to the average weighted life of the assets being over 50 years, does the depreciation rate still stay the same? So we're still putting the
Yes.
same amount?
Yep. So some of our younger supplies, we have quite a low funded depreciation rate because they'll build that. So build that kitty up over a longer period, and the investment will kick in. Whereas an older supply, you'd be funding 80% to 90% of that true depreciation cost.
Thank you.
Councillor Barnett?
Just two questions from me. One of the reasons why you're confident that this is a good strategy, would it be fair to say that, is it correct, you're confident in the asset base we've got following the earthquake renewals?
That's one of them. I think the other one is as well, you're growing as a council, and we keep on sustaining 2% plus growth. You're actually building your, not just your asset base, but your ratepayer base, and it can sustain it, so your actual loan can actually keep just creeping the same and still have the same type of ratio. But you can see from some of those tables they showed there, it's going from 187 down to 142, which means we're actually, even under this policy, we've actually got we're strengthening our position. So that gives you confidence. It gives me confidence as well that we're in the right framework. The other thing which we do differently to a lot of councils, and Audit New Zealand have commented on it, the Auditor General, is that the way we are putting away depreciation funding for future replacement, very prudent, they think, and we're in quite a good, strong position. So we were taking over, the three waters were taking over this. I would be quite confident that they'd be pretty happy with our position.
And you're confident that this will not affect our Standard & Poor's rating?
We've had a preliminary meeting with Standard & Poor's in the new year. They haven't indicated that it's going to change. We've put that proposal that it could be an option that the council have to consider. The main ratios they use were well within their maintaining that AA. They have said that there's still quite a high capital program there. That's the one that concerns them. But once again, I've sent them the current proposed statements, the plan and the statements that surround that, and I'm never ever confident with the numbers until you see them, but fairly more confident than not that would maintain a AA stable. You've got to remember the world economy's quite bad at the moment, and they have said to us that there's been more degradings in Australia than what there have been positives, and so that's something to be wary of. Another lockdown and whatever that does to the sovereign will affect us as well.
They did express confidence in New Zealand, didn't they?
Yes,
Yeah.
More positives in New Zealand than Australia.
Councillor Edmund?
Thanks, Jeff. Two questions. Firstly, do the rate projections that you've given us earlier apply to the Three Waters assets only, having their loan term extended, or have you factored in other assets with a long lifetime? That's question one.
Yeah, just the Three Waters at this stage until I have the modelling to put in front of the council to recommend anything further for the other assets. Because of roading has such an extensive network, and it's just really the culverts and bridges, I need to really have a good look at those numbers to see what the weighted, what it looks like, the modelling, and it's the same with the green space assets. I want to have a good look at those as well.
Well, just following on from that, secondly, if the policy is approved, in recommendation D, it notes that you will be looking at these other assets. Would that come to the council on a case-by-case basis if we approve the policy as recommended?
Yes, I wouldn't be looking at coming back in the current year. It would be later on after this plan with a recommendation. You take land purchases, for instance, you could do the same thing with land if you were to categorise it and leave the other assets out. So you could do that, but you just got to be careful that, like with roading, they have asset resales and stuff like that. That's much less than 25 years. So I just want to really do that modelling first. Much easier to do with the Three Waters.
Okay, thank you. There's a recommendation you're prepared to move, Councillor Atkinson, as per the order paper, and seconded by Councillor Ward. Do you wish to speak?
Well, there's been a great discussion around it, really. I mean, we've, right back in earthquake times, we've talked about our assets lasting 80, 90, sometimes 100 years, you know, with the improvement of quality products that are being used. So it makes sense to me that they're intergenerational when they're paid for, and not only that depreciation that comes on top of that. I think this is actually quite a prudent thing to do, and I think you'll see most councils doing it. I mean, I get the step where we're starting, and that was the reason for my question to Mr. Palmer. I don't want to be questioned by the government saying, well, you've only taken this particular piece because we're doing this, and that's going to come across the board, not just to us as a council, but I think to all councils. So I just want to make sure that we actually have the back discussions that we've had long before the Three Waters suggestions of going to other identities actually came up, because I can clearly remember these, and certainly when Jeff came with the new depreciation model to us, that we discussed life of assets, and that we in the future may be able to fund them over longer times and such like. So we've had those, and that was, I knew the answer to the question. It was just one of those things that I just wanted, you know, everybody to hear, and that we are on the right side of that fence, and I do believe we are. This is an important thing to do, and I think going forward it will be very beneficial, and certainly when we model all those other assets, which I get will be a bit of a complicated exercise in some places, but others will become very apparent and very easy to do. I mean, there would be very few buildings that we own that we would be replacing under 50 years, unless there are disasters. So, I mean, there's certainly things that we need to be looking at to see that we have the right loan periods and depreciation periods on. So I absolutely support this.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you. Yes, I thoroughly approve of this. Given that a lot of our infrastructure is fairly new since the earthquakes, and the change of how things are made up today, they're made to last a lot longer, and I think it makes a lot of sense to push out so that that is relief to people today, and that the repayment is spread over the people that are using it in the future. So makes a lot of sense, and is a very prudent thing to do, and I look forward to further enhancing the roading and other assets that we might have in the same way.
Okay, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, while it looks rosy, the world is full of calamities, and we're just talking about farmers' risks and problems that could come into the scenario. Jeff was just talking about our growth structure there helping this. Well, I understood we're going to be running out of land soon for growth, and it might going to be stopping. And so we haven't thought about the climate change. We don't know what's happening there. We don't know whether COVID's going to come back into it. We don't know when the alpine float's going to happen. We don't know. We may have to end up still keeping water. The water standards are going to rise. Our sewer system is going to have to be upgraded for the out to sea or ocean outflow or whatever we have to do. We've got to think of all those things, because nothing in my lifetime has really, well, probably in the last 20 years, has been standard. It's all been calamity after calamity, and this actually is basically implying there's going to be no more major calamities, where there are going to be some more. So I don't think we can address thinking our children and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren are going to have more money than what we've got to pay our debts at the moment. I think it's possibly going to be the opposite. So I think we've got to look after our future, and if we want something, we pay for it now.
Okay, so I have Councillor Barnett, Stewart and Redmond. Councillor Barnett.
Well, I want to congratulate staff on being innovative and looking at ways. We asked our staff to look at ways that they could lower rates, and this is lowering rates. But it's also managing our finances very, very prudently, and it's in line with other councils around the country. So I really want to congratulate the financial staff for finding this option, and I'm quite excited that they're going to look at other options which are sensible. When you take a mortgage on a house, you may never pay it back. You sell the asset to pay back the mortgage. So that's a totally normal situation. Yes, if situations change, we can change the policy. That's what happens. But I don't think we should be looking at everything as if it's going to crash tomorrow. We've got to look positively towards the future. And if something changes, we then change our financial policy. And I'm totally and utterly confident that we're in an excellent financial place, considering the earthquakes, considering the other financial issues that we've had over the past 10 years. I'm absolutely confident that this has been managed in an excellent way, and that's shown by our excellence rating in local government as well, and the confidence that our community has in us. So thank you very much for this, bringing this report to us. I'm totally in support, and if you can find other ways to lower rates, I'm all for it.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Certainly like to endorse my colleague Councillor Barnett's comments just then. I totally agree. I also am really enthused about applying this view across other of our assets, and as Jeff's indicated, certainly the big debts of the earthquake loan and the multi-court stadium, when they come, the existing loans come up for renewal, extending them out, because most of the assets that have been replaced through the earthquake loan are long life, and certainly we would confidently expect the multi-court stadium to last more than 25 years. But I'm attracted particularly too because, as other colleagues have said, PC7, and we'll get the first hint of that next week when the officer's response to the questions raised at the panel are publicised. They are going to hit our farming sector, and the thing that makes this so very attractive is that, as stated, it puts money directly in the hand of the people who need it, our farming sector particularly, right now. And progressively over the next 10 years. So that alone, and as I said, the philosophy associated with this is I embrace it totally. But this delivers money back into the hands of ratepayers, and if we're talking seriously about helping our community and the sectors of the community that really will need help in the next short to medium term, this actually does it. So certainly fully endorse it. Thank you.
Councillor Redmond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. When I first saw this, I was quite dubious because my traditional background is that the sooner you pay debt off, the better you are, because you save a lot over the term of the loan. However, I have changed my mind to a degree simply because this recommendation is focused on the Three Waters assets, and there is uncertainty with those, and Jim has echoed my thoughts in that area. So I'm prepared to support this recommendation on the basis that at the moment it is applying to the Three Waters assets, and that other assets will be looked at on a case-by-case basis, because it may not be a size of one size fits all, and we don't want to get too tricky and try and be too smart. But Jeff has been innovative, because I think in one of your responses, Jeff, you indicated only 2 other councils were doing this. So if that is the case, we're right out in front. So I think that's a good position for us. So having said that, I'm delighted now to support the motion, the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Mealings.
Yes, Jeff, I think this is a really great tool for us to have in our arsenal. It does address intergenerational equity, and whilst it is most of our, first thing that we think of is to reduce debt as quickly as possible. That's our personal debt that we will personally have to pay off, whereas these things are over assets that belong to all of us and over a long period of time. So I completely understand that. And I'm sure that I wouldn't like to see us necessarily apply this to a whole lot of things, but because of course I can quickly see a bow wave of 50 years amortizations to be built up over that time. But I am sure that you will be prudent and not put us in that position. You have an excellent track record in managing these things in the past, and I think that this is a great idea, particularly with that class of assets, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. I'm not going to prolong it, but just to say I support it as well. I think it's very prudent financial management, and that has been the hallmark of both yourself and Jim's leadership and the finance team and our broader team. So thanks, Jeff, for bringing this forward, and it carries my support. Right, a reply, Councillor?
Just very, very quickly, just to, I've sat through the last 10-year plan, and we had people submit to us about intergenerational costs, and have actually come to this council before us have said, we don't want to pay for people that are coming into this district, whether it be the youngsters or whether it be other youngsters. They need to pay their own way, and it's come through very strong in LTP, particularly LTP discussions. And the other thing is that Councillor Williams is 100% right. We do not know what we do not know.
Okay. With that, I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, declare that. So you're contrary, and do you wish your vote recorded? So I declare that carried. Right, now it's time for morning tea. So if we come back at 10 to 11, Denise, I assume you're here for an item to do with 4.2, so welcome. After morning tea, that'll be considered early in the piece, so it's one of the first reports up there. So just to let you know that you're welcome to join us for morning tea as well if you'd like to. Cheers. So we'll see you all at 10 to 11. Thank you.